Today, we're going to look at 3 stories, 3 caves in 3 different countries, and in each of them, people went in thinking they could handle it and never made it back out. The Matina Mountains in northern Iraq are rugged, harsh, and filled with caves that seem endless in their depth. For decades, these caves have served as hideouts and field hospitals for the PKK during their long war with Turkey. In July 2025, one of those caves became the setting for a disaster so strange and so sudden that it shocked the entire country. A unit of 19 Turkish soldiers entered a cave high up in Matina. This wasn't a combat raid. Their mission was to recover the remains of Infantry Lieutenant Nuri Mali Bozkurt, a soldier killed in action on May 28, 2022, during Operation Clawlock. His body had never been found. The cave they stepped into had once been used as a PKK hospital, but now it appeared abandoned, nothing more than damp walls and silence echoing in the dark. The soldiers advanced carefully, their flashlights cutting beams into the blackness. The air was heavy, but there were no signs of danger. And then, it happened. 5 men suddenly collapsed. Their comrades rushed to help, dragging them back toward the entrance, but it was already too late. The men weren't killed by bullets or bombs. They were being suffocated by something no one could see, smell, or fight: methane gas. Methane is invisible and odorless. It creeps through enclosed spaces, pushing out oxygen until every breath becomes thinner, harder, and finally impossible. The soldiers didn't stand a chance. By the end of that first day, 5 were dead. The survivors tried again the next day, determined to complete their mission. But the same deadly trap claimed even more lives. 7 more soldiers were overtaken by the gas. By the end of July 7th, the death toll had risen to 12, with 7 others rushed to hospitals in serious condition. Later, the names of some of the fallen were released: Ege, Abdurrahman, Ozkan, Masun, Ahmet, Umit, Kalatin, and Ahmet. Families across Turkey received the devastating news. The Turkish Ministry of Defense confirmed methane poisoning as the cause. There was no evidence of sabotage. Officials said the soldiers had followed standard protocols. Dogs were used to test the cave. Protective equipment was worn. They called it unforeseeable, an accident that could not have been prevented. But not everyone accepted that explanation. Military experts and opposition parties quickly raised questions. Why weren't more advanced gas detectors carried on the mission? Why weren't unmanned drones used first, instead of sending 19 men into an enclosed space blind to what was waiting? Inside Turkey, funerals were broadcast nationwide. Coffins draped in the red Turkish flag were carried by fellow soldiers, while families wept. Since 2019, Turkish forces had cleared nearly 4,000 caves during their operations against the PKK. Not once before had methane gas claimed lives like this. The Matina cave poisonings became one of the deadliest non-combat accidents in Turkey's modern military history. For the next story, we rewind back to August 18, 2005, Provo, Utah. 4 young friends entered a small cave on Y Mountain. Locals already had a nickname for it: the Cave of Death. And if you're wondering whether that's just an edgy joke, no, it was disturbingly accurate. The group, 24-year-old Blake Donner, his girlfriend 21-year-old Jennifer Galbraith, 28-year-old Scott McDonald, and 18-year-old Ariel Singer, had explored caves before. But this was different. This one was short, dark, flooded with freezing water, and barely big enough for a body to move through. It wasn't a cave system built for exploration. It was a trap waiting for volunteers. At about 4:30 in the morning, the 4 slipped into the rocky entrance with another friend, Joseph Ferguson. When they reached the fork inside, Ferguson hesitated. The others pressed forward. He stayed behind. That single choice likely saved his life. The cave narrowed quickly. After about 50 feet, the group reached a small cavern with a hole in the floor, a passage leading straight into an underwater tunnel. The tunnel was only 15 feet long, but in pitch-black water, where every splash stirred up clouds of sediment, it felt endless. On the other side was another cavern, barely big enough to stand in chest-high water, with only a small gap of air below the ceiling to breathe. Rescuers later confirmed that the 4 friends made it through to that second cavern. They surfaced, took a breath, probably laughed nervously, maybe even felt a rush of accomplishment. But the real danger wasn't getting in, it was getting back out. When they finally tried to return through the tunnel, something went wrong. Investigators believe one of them, Likely a young woman, got stuck or slowed down, blocking the way. In a tunnel this small, one body can become a wall, and with icy water pressing against your chest, no light, and only seconds of air in your lungs, panic comes fast. There was a rope underwater that led from one side of the cave to the other, a safety line, but investigators think they didn't use it. Maybe they didn't see it. Maybe they thought they didn't need it. Either way, without that rope, finding your way back would have felt like trying to escape a grave you couldn't see. If the oxygen level in the cave was hovering around 10 to 12%, she would have had about 60 seconds of breath holding before losing consciousness. And if that rope wasn't already in her hand, then finding the exit wasn't a calm swim. All four were found facing the exit as if they were trying desperately to swim back to the surface. None made it. Meanwhile, Joseph waited outside the cave for 45 minutes before realizing something was terribly wrong. At 6:25 a.m., he finally called police. Rescue crews rushed in, but even with pumps lowering the water by 2 feet and oxygen tanks ready, it took nearly 4 hours before divers recovered the first body. One was wedged in the tunnel floor, 2 were floating, another had likely blocked the exit. The cave's cruel design left them no chance. The scene outside was heartbreaking. Families waited for news. Jennifer's father, Chris Galbraith, said the only comfort he felt was faith that his daughter was greeted by family who had passed before her. Her mother Doris remembered her as fun-loving, always with friends. They also grieved for Blake Donner, Jennifer's boyfriend, an only child described as an artist, writer, and musician. 4 lives, all full of promise, were gone in one morning. Even veteran rescuers admitted the cave was unforgiving. People have got to understand it's a very dangerous environment, one officer said. That was an understatement. The group had entered wearing sandals, shorts, and no real gear, more prepared for a pool day than an underwater cave. The only items found were a flashlight and a couple of unlit candles, neither useful once the water swallowed them. After the recovery, officials didn't waste time. Rocks and fresh concrete were hauled up the mountain and used to permanently seal the cave shut. It was January 18, 2004 in Tamaulipas, Mexico. Nestled inside the El Cielo Biosphere Reserve, the old road between Gómez Farías and Altaima was a lifeline for small mountain communities. Picture a rough dirt track carved into limestone hills, winding through thick cloud forest, the kind of road where you hear more crickets than car horns. It was beautiful, it was remote, and it was dangerous. Hidden under the earth were countless caves and vertical pits, natural traps created by centuries of water carving through rock. That night, 30-year-old Cornelio García was making his way home from a party in Gómez Farías. He had spent the evening drinking, laughing, and celebrating with friends. As midnight passed, he decided to head home. Instead of taking the longer, safer paved route, he chose the mountain road he knew well. He'd walked it dozens of times before, even in darkness. To him, it wasn't risky. Unfortunately, alcohol has a way of making familiar roads feel easier than they really are. The night air was cool, the forest alive with sounds. Garcia, probably confident in his step, followed the rough path upward, but near a spot locals knew as the Rancho Cielo Junction, the road curved sharply. On one side was the mountain wall, on the other, hidden by vegetation and darkness, was something much worse, an 8-foot wide pit, just a small opening in the ground, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. But below that modest hole was a vertical shaft, 150 feet straight down. That's like falling from a 15-story building, only into stone, not concrete. Garcia, disoriented and unsteady from the alcohol, missed the curve. Maybe he thought he was still on the road. Maybe he stumbled. Whatever the reason, he stepped where no one should step. And just like that, he vanished into the darkness. The fall was catastrophic. A 150-foot free drop into limestone doesn't leave much room for survival. He landed at the bottom of the shaft, badly injured, unable to move, and with no way to call for help. The pit swallowed him completely, hiding the evidence of his fall except for a few disturbed patches of earth around its rim. When Garcia didn't return home, his family first assumed he'd stayed with friends. But as hours turned into the next day, worry set in. By Monday, the entire community was searching. They retraced his route, calling his name, checking side paths, even knocking on neighbors' doors. For several days, nothing. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. Finally, near the Rancho Cielo curve, they noticed the disturbed ground, the kind of subtle shift that only trained eyes or desperate ones would catch. The soil looked scuffed, as if someone had slipped. Then they found the pit. Flashlights revealed only blackness. Shouting his name down the shaft brought no response. The family faced an awful realization. If Garcia was down there, he couldn't get out, and they couldn't get him out either. That's when they called in Juan Musquiz, a veteran caver and rescuer from the nearby city of Monte. Musquiz had spent decades exploring the cave systems of Tamaulipas. He knew these pits weren't just holes. They were vertical death traps, requiring technical gear and careful planning. Within hours, Musquiz assembled a team of experienced cavers along with local firefighters for support. They brought ropes, harnesses, helmets, lights, and all the equipment needed for a vertical descent. The rescue operation began at the rim, where they secured anchor points into solid rock and tested every knot. When Musquiz reached the bottom, the reality was clear. Garcia hadn't survived the fall. His injuries were too severe. The pit hadn't just trapped him, it had claimed him almost instantly. Recovering his body was its own challenge. It took hours of coordinated rope work, with rescuers above and below communicating step by step. They brought Garcia back to the surface, finally reuniting him with the family who had searched for him so desperately. The official report documented the details: alcohol, darkness, a deceptive road curve, and a hidden pit only a few feet from where people walked. Caves don't forgive mistakes. Sometimes it's invisible gas. Sometimes it's a tunnel too small to turn around. Sometimes it's just one wrong step in the dark. Rest in peace to all the victims we talked about today. And if you've made it this far without clicking away, congratulations. You've survived longer than most of the people in today's stories. Give yourself a pat on the back. And hey, while you're at it, why not give that thumbs up a click, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for watching.